Hey, Next Economy Now listeners. We're excited to announce that registration for our fall cohort of the Next Economy MBA is officially open. Beginning September 22nd, this 9-month facilitated learning journey was created for listeners like you, the entrepreneurs, artists, community leaders, and other folks on the front lines of the Next Economy movement. Based on our 15 years of experience working with over 350 different social enterprises, we'll explore the pitfalls of the business-as-usual economy and dive into key business principles from a regenerative and equity-centered lens, all while fostering the community and connection we need to stay resilient, inspired, and motivated in our movement to create a world that works for all of us. Interested in learning more? Join us for a free intro session where you can meet course facilitators and hear from our amazing alumni to determine if this course is a fit for you. Plus, save 20% on tuition when you register before August 3rd during our early bird sale. Get started at lifteconomy.com/MBA. Thanks for listening. And now on to the show.
Welcome to Next Economy Now. The goal of this podcast series is to highlight the leaders who are taking a regenerative, bioregional, equitable, democratic, racially just, and whole systems approach to creating the new economy.
Hi, welcome. You're listening to the Next Economy Now podcast. I'm Phoenix Soleil, and I'm a partner at Lift Economy. Lift is an impact consulting firm whose mission is to create, model, and share a racially just, regenerative, and locally self-reliant economy that works for the benefit of all life. Lift it up! And today, my guest is David Yusem, and I'm so excited to have David here. Thank you for making the time. David is a leader in the field of restorative justice and conflict transformation with 26 years of experience. As a restorative justice coordinator for the Oakland Unified School District, he has played a pivotal role in transforming school discipline practices over the past decade. Under his leadership, OUSD, Oakland Unified School District, has become a national model for implementing restorative justice practices in schools. They're focused on building relationships, repairing harm, and fostering inclusive communities. Before working at OUSD, David managed the community mediation program at SEEDS and founded their restorative justice program. David also initiated restorative justice pilot programs at Alameda County Juvenile Justice Center and Berkeley Unified School District. Yusem's work in schools emphasized the importance of shifting from punitive disciplinary measures to restorative approaches that address the root causes of conflict and promote healing and repair. His efforts has contributed to a significant reduction in suspensions and expulsions and has been instrumental in creating a more equitable and supporting educational environment in Oakland. This is wonderful stuff, David. So glad to have you here. The question that I have starting is just, how did you get into this? What excited you about this? Yeah,
thanks, Phoenix. Thanks for having me here. Appreciate being on the podcast. I have always been a peacekeeper my entire life. I remember being in elementary school and just seeing two kids starting to get in an argument, and I would just naturally go up to them and kind of help them work it out. I didn't really notice this probably till I was in my 20s, but I've always been someone who's been able to see multiple sides of an issue. You know, I used to be in a band playing music and touring, and that's a bit of a crucible for conflict, being in a van for 18, 20 hours with people. And so I naturally was like the peacekeeper that people would almost fight knowing that I was going to intervene, and so, it's something that I was just naturally inclined towards, being a peacekeeper, helping people. I guess it's centered around empathy, just, being very much of a empathic person. But it really wasn't until my late 20s when I was thinking, what can I do in this life? How can I make a difference? What am I passionate about? What would really feed my soul? And it was right around that time that I heard about a community mediation 40-hour training. You probably took one of those years ago, right? The 40-hour training that a lot of community mediators go through. And this was in Oakland, California, where I live. And I did that in 2000, the year 2000. And I was really green. I didn't know what an I statement was. I didn't know much about anything. But I just knew that I really enjoyed that 40-hour training. And so I started to volunteer as a mediator. And at nights, there were 3-hour mediations, and it would be me and some other volunteer co-mediator. And I just did so many of those. Every kind of dispute you could think of, I was on these cases, mediating them, and I kind of cut my teeth on that. Landlord, tenant, neighbors, families, businesses, you name it. I learned the craft, and I did that volunteering, not just for the place in Oakland, which used to be called Conciliation Forums of Oakland.
Okay.
It's no longer around. So I joined the board of that organization right before it merged with a group in Berkeley called Berkeley Dispute Resolution Services. And I was mediating for them as well. And I was doing guardianship mediations out in Contra Costa County with conflict resolution panels out there. And to make a long story short, I ended up working for the organization that was a merger of all the East Bay mediation services. And that organization was called SEEDS, Community Resolution Center. And I became the community mediation program manager there. And I was taking in cases, working with volunteers to develop the cases, and then putting volunteers on mediations and helping people resolve their disputes. And I really enjoyed that work, and I had the opportunity to practice more. So I just did a lot of mediations. I learned what people are like when they're facing someone they're in conflict with. I learned what questions are really good to ask. I learned what didn't work. I learned the sort of cadence of conflict resolution and how people tend to be in terms of their energy levels and how long is needed for a particular case, what cases aren't good for mediation, not appropriate, things like that. And the importance of prep work, which is just absolutely crucial. And it was right around then when I was doing that work and at Seeds that in 2007, when I was called in to a meeting with the city attorney's office in Oakland and someone from the school district to talk about doing some mediations in the school district for students who had been expelled and they're coming back to school. The expulsion process didn't work. They were coming from another school or whatever. And at that meeting in 2007, someone from RJOY was there. RJOY is Restorative Justice for Oakland Youth. And that was my first interaction with someone from RJOY. And they came through just to promote like an event that was going to be coming up. I was like, RJOY, Restorative Justice, what's that? And I connected with Fania Davis, who was the executive director of RJOY at that time. And we became friends, and I learned a lot from her and from other people that were doing RJ in Oakland at that time and started getting trained in it. And I just resonated so hard with it. It has the conflict resolution aspect to it, but it goes beyond into just the relational component. Like it's about relationships and healing. And for me, that really is something I really like to lean into. So I took every RJOY training they offered. I became basically friends with the folks at RJOY at that time, at which it was really just Fania and then other folks who were connected to RJOY at that time. And because I was at Seeds, I had the opportunity to really just practice it and learn that craft, learn the craft of RJ. So
yeah. Well, I was thinking that some of the people who are listening might not know what restorative justice is. And the mediation where you have two people who have tension and you're helping them come to a resolution, I feel like that's in the parlance. That's kind of mainstream. But maybe if you could take time to just, so that people can stay with you, describe what is restorative justice and how is it different from the mediations you were doing?
Yeah, sure. So I don't have a patented response for that, which is just interesting because I've been asked a million times, what is restorative justice? But I feel like my answer changes every single time based on what I'm thinking about, how I'm feeling at the time, what I'm doing. But generally speaking, restorative justice comes from indigenous practices. It's inspired by indigenous values and practices, and not any one particular indigenous group, but tends to be how ancestral communities built community and then responded to harm and conflict within that community by creating spaces of healing and accountability rather than punishment. That's not to say that indigenous communities weren't punitive. That's obviously the case. I don't want to say that. But so in our standard traditional model in our society in the United States, when someone breaks the law or commits a harm, we basically ask, who did it? What did they do? And what are we going to do to them? How are we going to punish them? And it's the person who's been victimized or the person who's been harmed by that or the people, they are kind of left out of the process. They're usually confused, don't know what's going on, and get very little satisfaction at the end result when the person is either put in prison or whatever happens to them. And so the restorative justice is more about what was the harm that was caused? What are the obligations of the people that caused the harm, but also the obligations of the community that may have created the environment where that harm happened? And what do we need to do to make it as right as possible? So really it's about harms, needs, and obligations rather than who did it and what are we going to do to them. And so it's a more healing modality, or it's a more healing centered approach. And it's more generative because it's relational. In other words, the results are often much more creative than paint over the graffiti or rebuild this thing or pay this person back. They tend to be more relational because the process itself establishes and bonds people via their relationships and their connections with each other. And it's a very transformative process. So that's kind of how I think about restorative justice. In schools, it's a little bit different because our focus is mainly on community. It all stems from community building and creating the community that's inclusive, based in right relationships, welcoming, so that teaching and learning can happen. And then also, difficult conversations when they need to happen as well. So, yeah.
Yeah, I love this. Could you share an example of some of the things that you see happening in restorative justice circles? Because you've been doing it and you said that you just got passionate. I just like to feel like I'm over your shoulder, getting to experience some of it with the people listening in.
Yeah. Well, there's lots of different types of RJ circles. And the ones we primarily do are community building, proactive circles. So if you're going to come into Oakland Unified School District and observe a circle, you'll probably be observing a circle where people are just connecting with each other and maybe even having fun, playing some games with each other, talking about our shared values, and then having some kind of discussion question that's relevant and meaningful to whoever that community is. So if you were over my shoulder, you would see me walk into a space, work with the people who are there to create a circle of the chairs in that space, no table in the middle, just a circle of chairs. And then we would have a centerpiece down there, which is usually a cloth, and then it might have some meaningful objects on it, some elements of nature, earth, air, fire, water, and some talking pieces, which in schools, a lot of times they're like little stuffed animals or things that are meaningful to the community. Oftentimes there'll be a stuffed animal that the students will name that they have there. So, and then we have a process, like there's a flow of our circles. And whether it's talking about harm or whether it's providing support for like reentry or even for grief, the flow is pretty much the same. It's just the questions are different and what we might do is slightly different, but the process is pretty much the same. The flow is the same, which is there's always an opening. An opening is something just we all experience together. It could be a quote or a poem or some somatic movement-oriented thing or mindfulness, some breathing. Of course, it has to be differentiated for age, So again, in schools, you're working with TK through adult. And so what an 18-year-old might understand is going to be different than what a 5-year-old might understand. So we have to differentiate in many different ways for ages. But there's an opening, there'll be a check-in, temperature check, or just to allow people to speak into the space and say how they're feeling. And then we will usually do something around values related. I think values are kind of like the RJ difference. In other words, in standard meetings of people, we don't really cover what are our values. What are our shared values? What are our personal values for this particular space? And so it helps create a good conversation, a rich conversation where people can even be vulnerable if they choose to be. We might talk about our values or do an activity that's kind of related to values, meaning what we find important in our life, something that might be connected to us, our culture, our family, where we're from, the community that we're in, just to create some depth. And then we might play a game, do something real fun as a group to connect. It could be a game where we get to know each other better, like a name game, or it could just be a fun game where we get to learn about each other and have like an icebreaker kind of moment.
Yeah. I think it might be helpful for people listening to understand that because we were talking about mediation, we were talking about tension, and we were talking about harm. And now we're talking about how did we start talking about how is this all related? And so to support, these are in order to have restorative justice, you have to have something to restore to. So these are circles where people are building connection and
correct.
And you build using each other's values. In a school system, there's some people who always felt outside, right? Or felt disconnected.
Sure.
Sometimes you have communities that are very fragmented. They don't have a sense of responsibility and obligation to each other. So these circles are weaving those connections in. Is that correct? Yeah.
That's absolutely right. Yeah, absolutely. You want to have a community to restore to. Otherwise, you're just restoring to the same dysfunctional, toxic, broken thing that the system has supported, the educational system I'm talking about. And so we want to create a solid community from which we can springboard conversations that might be difficult. That's why it's important that we do these community building circles. You had asked about how it's different than mediation. Well, like I was just saying, a community building circle may not even be about conflict. In fact, it usually isn't. So that's one difference. Another difference is when we are talking about conflict or harm, I think the main difference is that it's not facilitated like a mediation is, where the power of the space is triangulated through the mediator, right? So if I'm a mediator and I'm doing a mediation process, I am very much the one in charge of that process, I guess would be the way to describe it. So the power is triangulated through me. I may even interrupt people. I am rephrasing what this person said. I'm getting another person to rephrase what another person said. I'm asking the questions. They're answering my questions. In a circle, it's held by the circle keeper, but not facilitated by the circle keeper. The circle facilitates itself. The people in the circle facilitate it. So I'll ask a question, and then I won't speak again until the talking piece comes around to me again. And then I may summarize what I've heard, or I may just ask another question and then pass it around again. I will not speak. So in other words, I'm not empathizing with each person. I'm not rephrasing what they said like you do in a mediation. And lastly, I think a mediation's there about problem solving a particular conflict, a specific conflict. Your fence is falling down. Your tree is dropping stuff in my yard. You took the toy I was playing with. You stepped on my shoes. Just whatever misunderstanding or conflict may have happened. It's problem solving that so that you can have the resolution, that opportunity. Whereas restorative justice it goes deeper into healing relationships and tends to have, I think, more depth to it and gets to the root of it, the root of what happened.
And this is where I'm going to really push you to give me examples if you can. Maybe you can change some details to protect confidentiality, but this is sounding abstract. You've got some people who, what does the word depth mean to you? Like, this is healing. What does that mean?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I can speak in, the thing about RJ, restorative justice, is it's a philosophy, but it's also a set of practices. And so I can speak in the philosophical about it, generally about what it is, where it comes from, how we roll it out, but it's a set of practices as well. And the practices are the practical and how it actually looks. So there are many examples. Some of them are intense conflicts between people, and most of them are just everyday misunderstandings or things that get swept under the rug, especially with adults, because I do a lot of adult conflicts as well in our district. So I'll give you one example if it would be helpful.
Very.
Yeah. So at a middle school in Oakland, a boy had been acting in a way to a girl that she didn't like. And they had been friends, but he had been approaching her too much like he was her boyfriend. And she had told him the boy was also a student with an IEP, individualized education plan. So he was in special ed, but in the general population of the students. So he wasn't really stopping. And they were friends, and she also had a boyfriend who was in high school. She told her boyfriend, who was in high school, came to the school with a gun looking for this other boy. Luckily, that boy actually was not at school that day. So he scared a lot of people at that school. The police were called, all this stuff, right? So there's a lot going on in that situation, right? There's a boy from another school coming. He's the boyfriend of the girl. Everybody in the school is scared. And then you've got the boy who is kind of harassing this girl. And then you've got their prior relationship, right? And so the principal asked me to look into this case. And so I met with the boy and his mom in person. And, I asked them, so what's going on? What's happening? And he kind of told his story of being friends with her. Yes, he likes her. Yes, he knows she had told him to stop, but it's kind of just how he was expressing his like for her. I met with the girl and her mom, and same kind of conversation. We used to be friends, or we are friends, but he's doing a little too much, and I just needed him to stop. And I made the mistake of telling my boyfriend, who then came to the school and caused a whole ruckus and scared a bunch of people. And I determined that it was appropriate to bring the boy, the girl, and both their moms together to talk about this, not the student from high school, not the boy from high school. And prep work is crucial in a restorative justice circle. So I think I spoke to them on the phone and in person multiple times before bringing them together.
And what were you doing before you got into the circle? What were you looking for when you were talking about them?
I'm looking for a lot of things. I'm looking for accountability and responsibility from everybody, not just the person who's done harm, but just people who are in conflicts or who are in situations. Everybody has some responsibility in some way. This is not like blaming the victim kind of responsibility. This is just like, what was the environment like? Is there a way that you contributed to this? And that's always a question I ask during prep. Is there a way that you have contributed to this situation? And it's a red flag if people say no to me. Most people have said like, yeah, maybe I shouldn't have used that tone, or yeah, whatever. So I'm looking for responsibility. I'm looking for accountability. I'm looking for them being sort of available to this process, coming together in good faith to work through this together. That's what I'm looking for. The last thing I want to do is cause more harm. So I don't want to bring people together to just create a bullying situation or more harm or harassment, right? So I need to be as sure as I can possibly be. And also I want to make sure that there's not going to be any violence or anything like that, right? So when I'm doing prep, I'm looking for that. I'm also going to describe the process that they're about to get into, which is why it's important that they've had experience with it already at school, even if just for community building. So they have that muscle memory of being in circle and passing a talking piece and that kind of thing.
That's why all of the pre-circles have been so important, because the community is already rich with this kind of understanding.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I always ask, when it's a clear harm and harmer situation, I always ask the person who's been harmed, who would they like to speak first? And 100% of the time they say, I would like the other person, the person who did the harm, to go first, because I guess they want to check for accountability. They want to make sure that that person's going to be accountable, right? But in this case, it was the boy who was harassing the girl, but then it was the girl whose boyfriend came to the school. It was a unique situation. So the long story short is the boy and his mom, the girl and her mom, and I sat down, and at first we just kind of had the boy go and say his perspective, and then the girl went and said her perspective, and then the parents got to talk about how they've been impacted by this. This is after doing an opening and a check-in, all those pre-things, circle things, but they were able to kind of work it out through this conversation. They were able to understand where each other was coming from. And then I remember asking the question like, well, a lot of people in the school were really scared by this boy who came to the school with a gun. And luckily you weren't there, so there wasn't any violence. The boy wasn't there. But like, how are you going to assure that that doesn't happen? And also, how are you going to, if people ask you, what are you going to say to them to assure them that things are safe? You know, what are you going to do for the two of you to create safety? And so they were able to come up with a plan to what they would say to people if people asked, you know, that they felt comfortable with saying. And I think they really heard each other, and they really knew where they were coming from. There were opportunities for them to experience empathy for the other person's position. And remember, the fact that they had a relationship before any of this, like a friend's relationship, that's gold, right? That's like something you can build from in a circle like this. And we ended the circle, and there was no problems after that. That's just an example of, in a traditional model, the boy would be suspended, and then he would just come back to school 3 days later and be expected to not do it again. And so they were able to work it out. Yeah.
Yeah. So in the traditional model, you're not actually there's no actual change. You're just hoping that they're scared enough to not do it again, which might not work.
Oh, clearly it doesn't work. If it worked, we would have no problems in our criminal justice system, right? Being punished for a crime would make sure that people don't do it again, and it would be 0% recidivism rates. But the recidivism rates are very high. So it's not a model that works. It's like giving someone a shot for like an illness they have, and the shot doesn't work. And you're like, well, the doctor's like, yeah, let me just give you another shot, and just keep giving people shots. And obviously you got to have another idea. The shots aren't working, you know, so.
I'm wondering in this case, did the boy, because what seemed like the boy was harassing the girl, did that stop as a part of this? It did.
It absolutely did, because the boy really got to hear, in a situation where she was uninterrupted, what it felt like to her, why she didn't like it. They had the space to have the conversation, and he agreed not to do that. And, you know, he liked her, and that was his way of expressing his feelings for her. And he understood that it was counterproductive. It's actually the worst way for him to express that. And so it's just, when people have the space to work things out, sometimes in these situations, I rarely say anything. Like, I just have to ask one question, and they just start working it out.
I think sometimes what happens in normal conversations, because part of my work, I am a mediator and I also do restorative justice, is that what happens is that people don't usually have the kind of space, because someone says something, you react to it, and then the other person reacts to what you just said, and then you react to that person, or you don't have the courage to really go into the depth of that you go, because you don't feel like the person's listening. So there's a whole thing that you're doing where you're creating this almost sacred space where people are listening in with so much more attentiveness than they do in the regular life. Yeah.
It is sacred. Absolutely sacred, and not in a necessarily religious sense, but it is a sacred space, meaning it's an intentional space. It's a space that's made with intention and that happens with intention. And people know that I'm going to be able to speak uninterrupted and say what I need to say. And that allows them to then listen to the other person that's speaking, which is crucial, that they listen. And so they were able to work that out. I mean, that's just one example. There's so many examples. I mean, some of them are very, like you might say, like intense or emotionally a lot going on with the individuals. But the fact is, I think most of the work we do is just, if it's not just the community building aspect, it's just helping people have the space to talk through something. It doesn't have to be a major incident that happened at the school. It can just be two people, students or adults, that just need to have the space to talk something through. Whereas normally they wouldn't have that space, especially with adults. We tend to sweep things under the rug. And the thing about conflict, Phoenix, is that it doesn't go away. It will always remanifest somehow. It's like whack-a-mole. You know, it's always going to pop up. You know what I mean?
Yeah. No, I share that. And again, I'm thinking about people listening in. I think it's so important, that sacred space that we're building, because the way you talk, when you feel like someone is committed to your humanity, is very different than a punitive perspective. Because we went to school and you've had that, you're a kid and you're looking at this tall human who has authority over you, and they're saying what happened in a certain tone, everything inside of you is activated. You're scared. You're just trying to save yourself because you're afraid something horrible is going to happen. This is not the space where you're really inspiring someone to their best humanity.
Yeah.
Whereas you have these Oakland school systems where you've been creating these circles where people feel listened to, which is already radical because we know loneliness is epidemic to the point where scientists are worried about it and our kids are on their phones. So creating a space where people know, hey, people actually care about who I am in being human, right? And then so you have that listening space. So then someone is going to be more vulnerable. They're going to be willing to say things that they wouldn't say, like, I shouldn't have done that. Or this is what was going on for me when I did that. And sometimes by speaking it and that space where they can actually look at themselves, then that you're encouraging that humanity to come out.
Yeah. So that makes me think about this. People are used to being punished, right? That's what we do in our society. That's our tool in our toolbox for misbehavior, harm, crime, whatever it is, right? And so if we hurt people, then that means that someone who does something wrong, who makes a mistake, that they can expect to be hurt if they admit to what they had done, right? So that's why when people say, why'd you do that? And the student says, I didn't do it, even though you watched them do it, they're going to deny it because to be accountable for it means I'm going to be hurt in some way, right? And so if you remove that in a school, if you remove like punishment, right, you are not going to be hurt by this, but you are going to be given the opportunity to make it right. That is a gift, right? But it's a culture shift and it's one that people have to understand before they're willing to engage in it, right? Like a school, it's not something that just flips into being restorative. You know, it takes time to understand. Students are used to adults not listening to them. Adults will be like, why'd you do it? Instead of what happened. Because when you say what happened, you're saying, all right, tell me your story. Start from whenever you want. What happened from your perspective? And then giving them the chance to make it right is truly the revolutionary act here, because then they'll be much more willing. If you're in an environment like that, you're going to be much more willing to be like, yeah, I made a mistake. I'm willing to understand what the needs are of everyone involved and try and make it right. I mean, we do that with math and English, right? Like if you make a mistake in math, your teacher's like, actually, you had these numbers wrong or whatever, let's correct it. And you're given a chance to correct it. But when it comes to behavior, for some reason in our society, we don't do that. We don't give people that option to correct the behavior or to make amends or to make it right in some way. We just say, oh, you crossed the line. Goodbye. We'll see you in 3 days. You're suspended, which clearly doesn't do anything except reinforce the school to prison pipeline.
Yeah. And I'm sure some people are like, but we have the news cycle that likes to show the people who can't change, never change. And I know you were saying there's so many different stories, but I was wondering if you have stories about people who have done something egregious, and how do you get, like maybe even something violent? How does this work? Because sometimes people are like, well, they must have known what they were doing. That was just so horrible. They must have known what they were doing and they did it. And so that cold-hearted idea of that some humans just aren't redeemable. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Restorative justice is not a panacea. You know, it's not a fix-all. It's not going to cure all of society's ills, right? It's not going to end poverty alone. So people need support sometimes in schools. Sometimes students need a lot more than just an RJ circle. Sometimes circles don't work, to be quite honest. They just need so much more intensive support, whether it's therapy or counseling or a mentor or whatever it is. So, you know, I don't want to pretend that RG is going to fix everything in a school or in society. It's a tool. It's a philosophy. I've seen it transform people in situations. And so it's great. And it can be very helpful in transforming society. But some people need a lot more support. And so we try to look at it holistically. Like some students, we have these things in our schools called COST, which stands for Coordination of Services Team. So it's kind of like wraparound services where a bunch of providers, including people from outside organizations, come together to talk about individual students and what they need to attend, achieve, and graduate. And sometimes that will include RJ circles. Sometimes it includes therapy, whatever. So, but you know what? Sometimes a case that you wouldn't think that a student or an adult would be able to repair harm, sometimes they surprise you, and they understand the situation that they're in. They understand that this is a space of listening and figuring out what needs to happen and to make it right, and they're willing to do that. Can I tell another story? This wasn't one that I facilitated, but one of our RJ facilitators, who are people who are at each one of our schools, not every school, but many of our schools, they're a site-based position that their job is to support whole school restorative justice. So he told me this, where two students had gone outside of the school into the neighborhood, and they saw at the end of somebody's driveway, they saw, or maybe by their yard, they saw a shrine that the couple who lived there had made for their son, who was a soldier who died in Iraq. And they destroyed it. They destroyed the shrine. And the husband and wife, whose son had died, who had made the shrine, they came right to the school. They knew that it was some students who had done that. And the school basically figured out pretty quickly who it was. And the RJ facilitator did the prep work. They did not suspend these students, which typically would happen. The RJ facilitator did the prep with the students and their parents, and they eventually, and obviously the people who were harmed by this really terrible act of violence against the shrine. So they brought them all together, the students, their parents, and the people whose shrine was destroyed. And they talked about what happened. The people who had made the shrine to their son, they talked about their son. They talked about what that shrine meant to them. In fact, at one point, the mother of the fallen soldier had pulled out a picture of her son and gave it to one of the boys and said, "You remind me a lot of my son when he was your age." And they came up with a way to repair the harm. You know, they went back. Obviously, they helped them rebuild the shrine, but they also pruned some trees in their yard that needed some pruning. And they had like a basketball court in the back. And even at times after when they repaired the shrine, the woman said, you know, feel free to come back and play ball on the court. And so they came back and hooped, you know, and so that kind of thing is an example of something that at first you would be like, oh my God, what do we do? We have to punish these boys. You know, that was terrible. But it ended up being something that was much more beautiful that came out of it, something relational, something where these boys really did have a learning experience. Discipline should be a learning experience. The word disciple comes from discipline. When you're a disciple, you're learning. And so discipline should be a learning experience. And this was obviously a learning experience for everyone involved, and also something you couldn't have predicted based on when you first started. So
yeah. Oh, thank you. I love hearing that, because what happened is that they experienced something that changed them, and there's a new relationship, a new bond that's created. And when I teach my workshops, what I say is that when you can navigate conflict well, then what happens is that you have a stronger bond than before.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. You know what I've noticed, Phoenix, is even because sometimes mediations or circles, like they don't typically work, that's air quotes work, you know, in the sense that sometimes people are still really tense at the end, or it doesn't really come to a nice tidy resolution, right? Like things are just still don't feel so great. And sometimes as a facilitator, I'll be like, darn it, what could I have done differently? This kind of failed, right? But then what I'll notice afterwards when I follow up with the parties is that simply by engaging in the process, it was like a bonding experience for them. And so even though, yeah, they may not have come to a resolution, yeah, things are tense, something about just engaging in that process, especially if it was a circle, bonded them in a way that helped their relationship. So I think that's important.
Yeah, because sometimes people have been socialized that what you do with tension is you avoid the person, or you pretend it doesn't exist.
Oh, yeah.
So even just talking about it a little bit, I can see how it would just shift into a more positive space. I wanted to say, because Lift Economy, our mission is to create an economy that benefits all life. And to us, an economy isn't just transactions. It's all the systems, all the systems working
Mhm.
together. Because when you have a circle, what you're looking at is people's humanity, and people become humans
Mhm.
because of all the experiences they've had. And so how do we create a world where people can have different experiences of healing conflict? We are not going to create a world where people don't harm each other, because we make mistakes. And we have a world where a lot of people are coming with lots of trauma, amazing amount of trauma.
Yeah.
How do we find positive ways to work with that? And that's in our businesses, that's in our homes, that's in all of our societies. The extent to which we can create these non-punitive systems that are more healthy means that we are having a safer place to be. We can have more trust. We can have more richness. So this is, to us at Lift Economy, a very important part of the picture of a better society. And I'm curious, since you've dedicated so much of your work, when you think about that, how this could work, what is your vision for how it shows up in society, or where you think it can go?
Yeah, my vision is that conflict is embraced. I mean, conflict will never go away. It's part of being human. And like you said, we do tend to avoid it. It's very uncomfortable. It's awkward. People do not want to engage with people they're in conflict with. They want to avoid it at all costs. And yet conflict can be very productive. It can be very generative. When you engage with another person that you're in conflict with, it's inherent is the opportunity for resolution, which would mean you've worked towards something better. You've achieved something better than where you were at. And so that's true between conflicts at teams, in companies, between individuals, and people in relationships. So my vision and my goal would be that even though it's awkward and it kind of sucks to talk to somebody that you're in conflict with and you don't want to do it, if we can embrace it as a society, then we'll be in a much better place. We'll be much more productive in our work. We'll be happier ultimately. But a lot of people don't have those tools, the tools to engage in effective dialogue, or what I call self-mediate, which is like setting up a time to have a conversation with someone and then having that conversation where you're both listening and speaking. And conflict is often hidden away, right? So like in a school or in a company, if there's two people that need to engage in conflict or more, they'll go to a room, the door is closed. There'll be a thing, do not disturb. It's confidential. Nobody can look in. Nobody knows what happened between the people. And the only message that comes out is what they both agreed can be messaged out. And so it's very much hidden away. And wouldn't it be interesting if there was, let's say in a school, that there was a room where people could go to, but you could look in. It's like glass, you know what I mean? Or there's just a space in the building where people can go and talk things out. They may or may not even have a facilitator. Maybe there's like a box of talking pieces and they can just take turn passing a talking piece back and forth to them. Other people could walk by and see that they're doing that and not necessarily interrupt, but just, looks like those two people are working something out. It would be that open. That would be very cool, because that would be an indication that we see it as normal and that we embrace it. And it reminds me actually of, I was at an elementary school once when I was sitting in a classroom of, I think they were like fourth graders, and the teacher's in the front of the room teaching the class. And I saw these two girls get up from their seats. They walked over to the peace corner, which is like a corner where there's bean bags, there's like a little rug, some manipulative toys, like things to just chill out. But they walked over there together. They picked up a can that had different talking pieces in it. They picked out a talking piece, and I saw them go back and forth with the talking piece for like probably less than 5 minutes. And then they put the talking piece back and they came back to class, and the teacher literally didn't stop teaching. She never even said anything. And I loved that. They just had a little thing. They worked it out. They came back, and the teacher never had to stop teaching. That would be great if we could take that as a model for our society.
Yeah. And you're reminding me, one of my life moments that got me into this work was seeing a live mediation. And I remember at the beginning thinking, oh yeah, this is never going to work. And then watching the miracle in front of me and being like, whoa. And you learn by that modeling, and what we have modeled right now in our societies is very different from what you're describing of that listening.
Yeah.
It doesn't make for easy editing on a TV show
No.
because it's slow and it's sacred.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. And, I must say, though, there is one thing in terms of like TV or recording it, because we have tried to shoot video of these kinds of circles for training purposes. And it's kind of like, this might be a bit esoteric, but in quantum physics, to observe is to change. Like to observe something is to change it. And it's the same with conflict, with people in conflict. Like if they know there's a camera there or that there's like a person with like a boom, like a mic boom, just simply that could change the interactions.
Yeah.
I mean, it still might be worth doing, but it does.
Yeah, it does. Well, I have a question for you because there's some people who are inspired and there's some people who are cynical, but I'm curious about the saying, how do people know, what do you do with those cases where it doesn't work? When peaceful intervention, I mean, this is a question that I always get in my workshops, and I'm curious how you answer it. Well, what if the other person just doesn't want to? Or what if I've tried to talk all the time and it just hasn't worked? And
yeah, well, sometimes, I mean, it's going to be on a case-by-case basis, but some things that you might do are provide separate circles of support for each individual instead of bringing them together. Sometimes it's not appropriate to bring people together because you're just going to create a situation where there's more harm, especially around like bullying, for example. Bullying is like the dysfunctional search for connection. That's how I see bullying, right? And it's a behavior. It's not a person. People are not bullies. People exhibit bullying behavior. And the reason they do is because they're trying to connect in this sort of negative way, right? We all want to connect. It's human. And some people do it in a way that harms other people. And so the person who's doing the bullying might not be ready to meet with the person who's been bullied or vice versa. And so it's not always a situation that you're going to bring people together to talk it through because you just might create a situation where more bullying happens, right? So in that case, you might provide separate circles for those individuals where they are getting the support they need to identify what they need and then help them be successful or move through school to attend school and connect in an appropriate way. So that might be helpful. Like I said before, sometimes people just need much more support than they're getting. People will fall through the cracks. Maybe they have an undiagnosed dyslexia or dyscalculia, or they can't see very well, and it's hard for them to read or whatever it is. Sometimes it's as simple as that. And they just need some attention and some space, and hopefully we can work through it that way. But yeah, sometimes some adults have a really hard time figuring out what it is. And the student will keep causing harm at the school. And the adults are sort of not sure what to do in those situations. And ultimately, the student might do something that gets them, expelled. And so sometimes they just need a different educational environment. Sometimes a big school is not the place for some students. Sometimes a small school is not the place for some students. And so it really is about just spending time figuring out what this student needs. It's not up to kids to fit into a mold. It's up to us to figure out how to teach them. It's up to us to figure out what they need to learn. And so we just have to do that as adults. It's incumbent upon us, the adults in the system, to create a learning environment where everyone can learn. And some students just need a lot more support or some thinking with them. So, and then honestly, I'll just be honest, sometimes it's really hard to figure out what to do for some students.
Yeah. And what you're touching on is time and how life gets so busy in some of the communities that you work with and that I've worked in. There's not a lot of resource. The adults are under a lot of pressure. And this is where we need a real change in society where people have more time with each other. And I don't expect you to solve that problem, but if you do, I'm all for it. But just to name that that there's so much we can do and there's so much more we could do if we had the resources and the time to do it.
Yeah, well, time spent up front saves time in the long run. So that's why it's so important. I keep coming back to the environment. I keep coming back to the proactive circles to build spaces for connection and community. That's why we spend 90% of our time in schools doing those circles. It's to spend time on the front end to avoid having to spend time in the long. And that's why, I encourage teachers to do circles even during instructional time. It's not just something that you do like in advisory or when you have a free moment. Be intentional, create space for connection, because then teaching and learning will happen and you will save time. And yeah, you're right. Our society is the way we have it now. Time and space does not lend itself to this process. It can be really hard. Even doing a circle where all the chairs and the desks are connected to each other, like they are in school, that's even weird. Sometimes you have to sit on the desks, or you just put the chairs in a circle and deal with the fact that everybody's got their own little desk in front of them. But you got to work with what you got.
Yeah, thank you. There's so much more I want to say, but I love this, and you've given me and everyone some really great things to think about. And I want people to know about ways they can find out more. So you've created a website on the Oakland Unified School District page, www.ousd.org/restorative-justice, RESTORATIVE-JUSTICE. And that also will be on the podcast page for David Yusem with his bio. I'm doing a series on restorative justice, so please listen to some of the other ones on restorative justice. Any last words, David?
I mean, yeah, as Bob Marley would say, I've got so much things to say, but no, I appreciate you for leaning into this work. I do think it's important in the new economy that we think differently about how we are with each other. And also, I think the last thing I'll say, Phoenix, is that things are going to change drastically in the near future with AI. And I think the skills that are going to be important for people to embrace and to learn and engage with each other are these skills that we learn through restorative circles. The skills of patience and empathy, self-awareness, self-management, understanding the community, feeling a part of a community, and being able to talk with each other, especially around difficult subjects. These are the skills that are going to be very important in the new economy moving forward and in the future. I'm positive about that.
Yes. And I also am a resource. You can find my email address, phoenix@lifteconomy.com, and I teach the Next Economy Leadership Series. We're going to have some classes in the fall. We do it at spring and the fall. And also phoenixsoleil.com for facilitation support, mediations, coachings, and so on. All right. So we'll end it here, knowing that the conversation and the work continues. All right. Take care.
Hey, Next Economy Now listeners. If you enjoyed this conversation and are looking to dive even deeper into the B Corp movement, you'll love our new podcast, Beyond the B, hosted by Lyft Economy's Amy Allison and me, Ryan Honeyman. Beyond the B is your insider's guide to the B Corp movement. You'll learn about the new B Corp standards shaping our community, how the B Corp movement is navigating the various tensions and challenges of growth, and how businesses like Patagonia are putting their commitments to people and planet in practice. Check out our latest episodes and free resources at lifteconomy.com/beyond. You can also subscribe to Beyond the B on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, or wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks again for listening.
Hey, Next Economy Now listeners. If you haven't gathered from our podcast already, we're really passionate about helping to build a future that works for all of us. If you share that passion and are looking to deepen your practice, we want to share a few ways to connect and learn directly with the Lyft Economy team. You've likely heard of the Next Economy MBA, which we started almost 10 years ago and have trained over 800 alumni through the fundamentals of business design from a regenerative and just perspective. New this year, our Next Economy Fund will embody our values of democratically allocating resources to Next Economy entrepreneurs that are part of our alumni network. We've also launched 2 trainings that came directly out of our MBA community's desire for more in-depth skill building around 2 key topics: organizational leadership and personal life design. Next Economy Leadership is a workshop series designed to help culture leaders at purpose-driven organizations move towards full embodiment of their values. And Next Economy Living is a 6-month training designed to help everyday citizens and consumers take actionable next steps to transform their local communities to align with a future that works for all of us. You can hear about all of these offerings and other ways we're supporting the Next Economy movement at lifteconomy.com/next steps. We deeply appreciate you being a listener of our show, especially in a cultural moment when attention and community are hard to come by. We're amazed by the community of folks we get to learn alongside through these offerings and hope you'll consider joining us.